What even is the story that you want to create? I'm not trying to pigeonhole you, but I think it's a pretty important question to have the answer to if you're going to write stories. You gotta know what you're doing. Because your taste, your life experience, your soul has a preference for what you like when it comes to story, and I think that this kind of seamlessly pointless journey of articulation could be fun and insightful. So where do we start in this definition of story? When you really think about it, everyone kind of has a little definition of words that are important to them. There's always nuance between them. And so we're going to do my definition. And I'm excited to see how ours differ because, like I said, we all have different tastes and preferences. And so to kick things off, I just want to say, I honestly have no idea where we're starting here. And so we're just going to go back to factory settings. And so my factory settings was hijacked by the ancient philosophy class I had to take when I was 15. Putting a bunch of 15-year-olds in a philosophy class, a lot of things can happen, like the term meat puppet and virtue sandwich, but I think there are three notable things that it did to my brain. One, it deep fried it. Two, it gave me an unquenchable search for knowledge that can be misunderstood as skepticism. And three, a knowledge that things are never simple when it comes to philosophy because philosophy has everything to do with humans and humans are so complicated. And there is a fourth thing. The ability to quote random philosophers like Aristotle. Like Aristotle said at the beginning of Nicomachean ethics, we must start from what is known, but things are known in two senses, known to us and known absolutely. Presumably we must start with what is known. That's like on page 7 or something. This is just a part of my factory settings. No, I haven't gotten an update. This is just how my brain works. It always has fascinated me how people just have a different way of going about something that they don't know about and like looking into it. And so like I was saying, factory settings. My factory settings, we're going to start with what is known. What do I know? And I know that I prefer narrative heavy stories with 3 acts. I definitely love a good versus evil. And I really love a nuanced human perspective. So I really enjoy themes and having to do with like the universal human experience. I also really love complex characters. And that's not to say a static character is bad or that I don't enjoy them quite a bit. Trust me, I do. I have collected every single Nancy Drew book, all 64 of them. I've seen every episode of Murder, She Wrote, like your 74-year-old grandmother. And am I tired of Luffy saying he's gonna be the Pirate King? No, I'm not. I love it. I love it so much, but this is where my preference and my tastes differ a little bit. But maybe one day it will appeal to me to write more of a static character. For now, it doesn't really interest me. I like complex things, and I also like structured things. So the stories I'm going to write will definitely have definitive structure. So that's all I really can think of like the different components of story that I feel are very important to me. And so now I feel like it's time to venture into the absolute known. I'm not really absolutely sure about anything, so that's why I think we should go to the dictionary, because at the same time, dictionaries are a consensus. And so I think that can kind of be categorized as an absolute known. And so we'll see how the dictionary definition will affect my definition. Let's see if we can make like a cohesive definition of what I think stories should be. So the dictionary defines a story as an account of incidents or events, a statement regarding facts pertinent to a situation in question, and then it says an anecdote, especially an amusing one, or it says a fictional narrative shorter than a novel, specifically a short story, the intrigue or plot of a narrative or dramatic work, or a widely circulated rumor. At first I thought this was really not helpful. It kind of gives the same vibe as if you like look up a word and then that word is in its definition, but there is some things that align with my original thoughts. The definition does recognize a series of events, and so that recognizes the structure aspect of stories that I like. Even though it's overall not very helpful, this definition got me thinking about story structure. It's just a specific way of how events are ordered. But I do believe those events should be connected. So a story is a connected series of events, but series of events can go on forever and ever. I think that stories definitely should have a beginning, middle, and end, so it doesn't go on. But what type of connection should those events have? I recently discovered a book called The Dictionary of Narratology by Gerald. He gives these really, really long-winded definitions of like narrative terms with like lots of footnotes, but it's actually really helpful. And he defines story as a causal sequence of events pertinent to the character or characters seeking to solve a problem or reach a goal. As such, through every story is a narrative, the recounting of one or more events. Not every narrative is necessarily a story. Consider, for instance, a narrative merely recounting a temporal sequence of events that are not causally related. That's kind of a lot, but I think it's giving me the context I'm looking for, that stories are causal. Everything is cause and effect in nature, so it makes sense that in fiction there will be kind of the same sort of structure. And at the same time, I've read some fragmented stories before, and they are interesting, but I'm really drawn to the idea of the story being one unit, kind of that beginning, middle, and end thing that I talked about. And this idea reminds me of what Flannery O'Connor said, and Freytag said the same thing as well, calling stories a complete dramatic action. It was so interesting reading both of them at two separate times and remembering that they both called it that, even though they lived in two different times of history. Very interesting. So I think that consensus can give some merit to a definition of story. Freytag also goes on to say in the same work, The Techniques of the Drama, I think that's what it's called, he says, "It is the business of action to represent us the inner consistency of events, as it corresponds to the demands of the intellect and the heart. Whatever in the crude material does not serve this purpose, it is the poet's duty to throw it away." I think I agree with this, that if it doesn't serve the story, then it goes. But what is this inner consistency? The more that I thought about it, the more that I settled on the idea of this inner consistency being reactionary, because it would be a contained unit. It's reacting on what is already there. So all we've talked about so far is that a story has to do with a universal human experience that has a solid internal structure and that exists as a unit. That's kind of where we are right now. And so I'm trying to think concisely. And the more that I thought about it, the more that I kind of spiraled and was like, okay, how do I condense this down? I came up with a concise definition of an organic reactionary entity. Like we talked about earlier, I value this idea of the human experience. That's why I settled on the idea of organic, because the story comes from what is alive and those who have lived. We can't separate our human experience from what we make. Even if we're writing about an alien planet or the apocalypse or magic or whatever, even if we're writing about animals, there will always be this anthropomorphication happening because we can't separate ourselves. Reactionary, too, I think is a really important descriptor of the series of events. I debated putting the word causal and explored this idea of causality because I do think that stories follow a cause and effect structure at its core, no matter what kind of story structure you're using. There's always a causal field to what's happening. One thing happens and then another thing happens. But reactionary allows for the character to react to the current situation and the events before them. And I feel like it adds more nuance. It also gives parameters to what I'm talking about when I say organic, because organic is the indicator of life, something living, existing in stories. But all life, all reality, that's a bit much. And so having it be reactionary allows for the events to be traceable, to be clear. Then entity has to be included because I believe that stories have their own autonomy. In their own way, they have their own independent existence. And so we've got organic, reactionary, entity. Or I think we should go back to what Freytag and O'Connor was saying, how it's a complete dramatic action. And so we should say a complete organic reactionary entity. I think I like it. This idea of adding completeness to the word entity, yes, it has its own independent existence, but at the same time, that existence is complete. It lives and dies in the same place. And so having a beginning, middle, and end. And so I think this is the definition I'm going to work off of. Whenever someone asks me what I think a story is, this is it. This is the type of story that I want to tell. As I was saying earlier, my brain has really been hijacked by that ancient philosophy class I took when I was 15. And so the idea of the Socratic method, the idea of just discussing and seeing where it takes us, is something that has always fascinated me. And so thinking about story, thinking about what it is and what it means to me, I think that the next train of thought in this Socratic discussion that we're going to be having is, what is story in actuality? Because we're talking about the concept of story, a complete organic reactionary entity. We're talking about story as an idea. But what is it in concept, in reality? And so I think we need to have a question of medium next, understanding what it is and how that facilitates story. Or is there another important question that should be answered next after thinking about the idea of story? And then what else? What question sparks after thinking about the idea of story? Okay, I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm gonna be so real right now. I didn't realize that it made like an acronym, and I kind of love it. I'm kind of taking it as a sign that this is right. I don't know if that's a little far-fetched, but I mean, come on. Core? Like that works really well.